Hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are continuing on with The Man Who Laughs by Victor Hugo, starting with part 2, book the 5th, chapter 3. But first, reading updates. I am reading a book called Womb City, and it comes out January 26th. And I am 60, I don't know what percentage I am. I was gonna tell you and I can't because I don't remember. I'm like in the 40s, I think. 40 percentage. But okay, so it takes place in this futuristic world where people can hop into different bodies. And there's a bunch of restrictions. So, like, if the consciousness has created a crime, that body is then tagged with like a microchip. And they have to like go through all of these different things for the next consciousness that goes in there. So if you're the consciousness that commits the crime, you go to like prison, which is basically just like your consciousness is just doing nothing for eternity, basically. And then the body goes on to another consciousness, and that new consciousness has to go through a bunch of different tests and purity evaluations, things like that, to see if there's any sort of lingering urge that the body has to like commit crimes, that sort of thing. Mostly the people who are microchipped are female, and it's just wild. It's so wild. I don't even know how to like go into the intricacies because there's so many intricacies of this world. And what I thought was going to be happening, so our main character, Nayla, is married to some high up person in the police force, but she's also having an affair with somebody. She is microchipped. She has like a bunch of different ways that she gets around the purity test so that she can pass each time. One of them is this little like device that she clicks, and then it just like changes, like her eyes are no longer recording the things that are happening. It regulates her like blood and like her heartbeat and all of these other things so that she can do whatever it is she wants to do. Cheating, uh drugs, like all of those things, and none of them are going to be recorded. She just needs to like come up with an about thing that happened. So like, I went to work from this time to this time, which is true. And then I went out with a colleague afterwards, which is true. Like that sort of thing, like sort of getting around like what actually happened. But something tragic happens. Something very tragic and wild and dark happens while her body is not being monitored. If her body was being monitored, it would, like, drones would have come in and stopped her from this thing happening. So, this thing has happened while she is with the person that she's cheating with. Yes. I just don't remember his name, otherwise I would be saying his name. Um, and so it's like, oh, okay, well, you can still like get out of this. Like, there's still a way to sort of like retract, well, not retract, but sort of like make things better, type of a thing. And they don't make anything better. In fact, they make things much, much worse, and it's terrible. And then you're like, okay, so the story has changed. Now we're doing this, and now we're trying to like hide and cover up the thing that we did that happened. But then something even wilder starts happening. And now I feel like the story is going a completely different direction. And I'm at 43%, something like that. And I just don't know. It's wild. It's wild. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. Wild, wild, wild. It's just so wild. And like people, like their consciousness lives up to 300 years, 200 years, something like that. And when their body gets to 70, then they change bodies. and their memories erased from like the time before. Like it's just there's a lot of like little things that go along with this world. So yeah, I'm reading that. It's insane. And also I need to like pick up my reading, which is why I started reading this book like off stream. Because I was accepted for another advanced book that comes out in January. It's a nonfiction book called Witchcraft, and it is about 13 different trials around the world, not just in the US. And I'm very excited to read that. And then I have two books that I've requested from the library that are on, like, in transit. So, and a book club book, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which, if you're on Patreon, welcome to the book club. If not, and you would like to be, shameless plug. I have a Patreon with a book club. So that'll be in January, and it's just like I just need to read. Reading is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I love it so, so much. But there's so many things. And that's all I'm reading. I do have volume 6 of Tokyo Ghoul, which I have not started. It does not take me a long time to read it. I should just read it. Just read it and return it and get the next one. But I haven't done that yet. So today, part 2, book the 5th, chapter 3. What happened last time? Ooh, big things happened last time. So, two times ago, two times ago, two times ago, the Wapentake tapped Gwynplaine on the shoulder, which means that Gwynplaine has to follow this person wherever they go. And nobody is allowed to follow them. They're basically like a secret, high-powered, like, police person. And so Gwynplaine is following, and Ursus is like trailing behind just to see what happens. Before Ursus leaves, he tells, the other people in his troop that they should not tell Dea what is happening so that she doesn't worry. Because it's very possible that Gwynplaine and Ursus will be back for the performance later that night. So, Ursus is following, and there comes a point in the road where it's like, okay, if they go left, everything's fine because they're just going to go to court and Gwynplaine will be home, by 6 p.m., like whatever. But if they go right, then that means that terrible things are going to be happening. And lo and behold, they go right. So, they go right, and then we get a little history of torture chambers in England, which there has never been an official torture chamber. They're not real, they don't exist, type of a deal. And so Gwynplaine goes in there with this troop of people that he has been escorting him, and he gets in there, and there is a naked man who is being tortured. There's like a big, heavy, like iron metal plate on this person with like a bunch of rocks stacked on top, and there are two people who are there. I don't remember their titles, but they're talking back and forth. One of them is talking in Latin, the other one is talking in English, and they're just going through and saying, like, okay, the first day that you were here, we didn't give you any food, didn't give you any water. The second day that you were here, like, all of this, like, horrible things. And it is now the fourth day. And so you must, give us your confession. If you don't, like, these are the things that are going to be happening to you. Horrible, horrible, terrible things. Um, all while Gwynplaine is in the room, just like watching this happen, which is very odd. But the person who is being tortured lifts up his head after, like, the two guys who are like going back and forth between Latin and English bring Gwynplaine like into the light. And the guy who's being tortured lifts up his head and was like, "That's him. That's him. That's him. That's him." And they're like, okay, cool. And then they talk a little bit, and then the guy who's being tortured just like goes on this, not tirade, not rant, but like almost maniacal, like borderline insane thing. And he says to Gwynplaine, like, you're forever laughing, and now I'm the one that's laughing. And then he laughs, and then he dies. And it turns out that this person is Hardquanonne. Who's Hardquanonne, you might ask? Well, let me tell you. He is the person who gave the scars to Gwynplaine. And he confesses that he did it to Gwynplaine when he was a boy. Gwynplaine's name isn't really Gwynplaine. He is part of the Clan Charlie family, which means Gwynplaine is now a royal, and Gwynplaine is now part of the aristocracy, and he has all of this land and all of this power. Why did Harquanon do this? Because he was paid by the king to do this. And all of this is corroborated by a note that Barkilphedro found in the ocean that washed up on shore, and it was the confession of the people who dropped off Gwynplaine when he was a child. And I think that's where we left off. Insane. All right, so with all that being said, let's do it. Chapter 3, An Awakening. No man could pass suddenly from Siberia into Senegal without losing unconsciousness. H. Humboldt. The swoon of a man, even of one the most firm and energetic, under the sudden shock of an unexpected stroke of good fortune, is nothing wonderful. A man is knocked down by the unforeseeable blow, like an ox by the pole axe. Francis d'Albescola, he who tore from the Turkish ports their iron chains, remained a whole day without consciousness while they made him pope. Now the stride from a cardinal to a pope is less than that from a mountebank to a peer of England. No shock is so violent as a loss of equilibrium. When Gwynplaine came to himself and caught his eyes, it was night. He was in an armchair, in the midst of a large chamber lined throughout with purple velvet, over walls, ceiling, and floor. The carpet was velvet. Standing near him, with uncovered head, was the fat man in the traveling cloak, who had emerged from behind the pillar in the cell at Southwark. Gwynplaine was alone in the chamber with him. From the chair, by extending his arms, he could reach 2 tables, each bearing a branch of 6 lighted wax candles. On one of these tables there were papers and a casket. On the other, refreshments, a cold fowl, wine and brandy served on a silver gilt salver. Through the panes of a high window, reaching from the ceiling to the floor, a semicircle of pillars was to be seen, in the clear April air, encircling a courtyard with 3 gates, one very wide, and the other 2 low. The carriage gate, of great size, was in the middle, on the right, that for equestrians, smaller, on the left, that for foot passengers, still less. These gates were formed of iron railings with glittering points. A tall piece of sculpture surmounted the central one. The columns were probably in white marble, as well as the pavement of the court, thus producing an effect like snow, and framed in its sheet of flat flags was a mosaic, the pattern of which was vaguely marked in the shadow. This mosaic, when seen by daylight, would no doubt have disclosed to the sight, with much emblazonry and many colors, a gigantic coat of arms in the Florentine fashion. Zigzags of balustrades rose and fell, indicating stairs of terraces. Over the court frowned an immense pile of architecture, now shadowy and vague in the starlight. Intervals of sky, full of stars, marked out clearly the outline of the palace. An enormous roof could be seen, with the gables ends vaulted. Garret windows, roofed over like visors, chimneys like towers, and entablatures covered with motionless gods and goddesses. Beyond the colonnade, there played in the shadow one of those fairy fountains in which, as the water falls from basin to basin, it combines the beauty of rain with that of the cascade, and as if scattering the contents of a jewel box, flings to the wind its diamonds and its pearls, as though to divert the statues around. Long rows of windows ranged separately, separated by panoplies in relievo and by busts on small pedestals. On the pinnacles, trophies and morions with plumes cut in stone altered with statues of heathen deities. In the chamber where Gwynplaine was, on the side opposite the window, was a fireplace as high as the ceiling, and on another, under a dais, one of those old, spacious, feudal beds which were reached by a ladder, and where you might sleep lying across. The joint stool of the bed was at its side. A row of armchairs by the walls and a row of ordinary chairs in front of them completed the furniture. The ceiling was domed. A great wood fire in the French fashion blazed in the fireplace by the richness of the flames, variegated of rose color and green. A judge of such things would have seen that the wood was ash, a great luxury. The room was so large that the branches of candles failed to light it up. Here and there curtains over doors, falling and swaying, indicated communications with other rooms. The style of the room was altogether that of the reign of James I, a style square and massive, antiquated and magnificent. Like the carpet and the lining of the chamber, the dais, the baldaquin, the bed, stool, the curtains, the mantelpiece, the coverings of the table, the sofas, the chairs, were all of purple velvet. There was no gilding, except on the ceiling. Laid on it at equal distance from the four angles was a huge round shield of embossed metal, on which sparkled in dazzling relief various coats of arms. Amongst the devices on two blazons side by side were to be distinguished the cap of a baron and the coronet of a marquis. Were they of brass or of silver gilt? You could not tell. They seemed to be of gold, and in the center of this lordly ceiling, like a gloomy and magnificent sky, the gleaming escutcheon was as the dark splendor of a sun shining in the night. The savage, in whom is embodied the free man, is nearly as restless in a palace as in a prison. This magnificent chamber was depressing. So much splendor produces fear. Who could be the inhabitant of this stately palace? To what colossus did all this grandeur appertain? Of what lion is this the lair? Gwynplaine, as yet but half awake, was heavy at heart. "Where am I?" he asked. The man who was standing before him answered, "You are in your own house, my lord." End of chapter 3. So, Gwynplaine awakens, and we're just looking around the room, and it is a sight. It is just velvet, purple velvet, basically floor to ceiling. Everything just very purple velvet. Both Prince and Barney would be so excited. And he's just looking around, and he's just like, this is a lot. Who who would live here? This is too much. It's far too much. And so he actually asks out loud, "Whose home is this?" And the guy who is there with him is like, "Why, it's yours, my lord." Interesting. Interesting. So Gwynplaine is now, having been on the streets for 15 years as a vagabond, as a traveling performer, all of these things, who has starved probably a lot of his life, um, is now just a lord and is being treated differently and is just living the life. And so far, I mean, so far not much has happened. He like woke up, that's all that's happened. But 'tis a lot. Chapter 4. Fascination. It takes time to rise to the surface, and Gwynplaine had been thrown into an abyss of stupefaction. We do not gain our footing at once in unknown depths. There are routes of ideas, as there are routes of armies. That rally is not immediate. We feel as it were scattered, as though some strange evaporation of self were taking place. God is the arm, chance is the sling, man is the pebble. How are you to resist once flung? Gwynplaine, if we may coin the expression, ricocheted from one surprise to another. After the love letter of the Duchess came the revelation of the Southwark dungeon. In destiny, when wonders begin, prepare yourself for blow upon blow. The gloomy portals once open, prodigies pour in. A breach once made in the wall, and events rush upon us pell-mell. The marvelous never comes singly. The marvelous is an obscurity. The shadow of this obscurity was over Gwynplaine. What was happening to him seemed unintelligible. He saw everything through the mist which a deep commotion leaves in the mind, like the dust caused by a falling ruin. The shock had been from top to bottom. Nothing was clear to him. However, light always returns by degrees. The dust settles. Moment by moment, the destiny of astonishment decreases. Gwynplaine was like a man with his eyes open and fixed in a dream, as if trying to see what may be within it. He dispersed the mist. Then he reshaped it. He had intermittences of wandering. He underwent that oscillation of the mind in the unforeseen which alternately pushes us in the direction in which we understand, and then throws us back in that which is incomprehensible. Who has not at some time felt this pendulum in his brain? By degrees his thoughts dilated in the darkness of the event, as the pupil of his eye had done in the underground shadows of Southwark. The difficulty was to succeed in putting a certain space between accumulated sensations. Before that combustion of hazy ideas called comprehension can take place, air must be admitted between the emotions. Their air was wanting. The event, so to speak, could not be breathed. In entering that terrible cell at Southwark, Gwynplaine had expected the iron collar of a felony. They had placed on his head the coronet of a peer. How could this be? There had not been space of time enough between what Gwynplaine had feared and what had really occurred. It had succeeded too quickly, his terror changing into other feelings too abruptly for comprehension. The contrasts were too tightly packed one against the other. Gwynplaine made an effort to withdraw his mind from the vice. He was silent. This is the instinct of great stupefaction, which is more on the defensive than it is thought to be. Who says nothing is prepared for everything. A word of yours allowed to drop may be seized in some unknown system of wheels, and your utter destruction be compassed in its complex machinery. The poor and weak live in terror of being crushed. The crowd ever expect to be trodden down. Gwynplaine had long been one of the crowd. A singular state of human uneasiness can be expressed by the words, "Let us see what will happen." Gwynplaine was in this state. You feel that you have not gained your equilibrium when an unexpected situation surges up under your feet. You watch for something which must produce a result. You are vaguely attentive. We will see what happens. What? You do not know. Whom? You watch. The man with the paunch repeated, "You are in your own house, my lord." Gwynplaine felt himself. In surprises, we first look to make sure that things exist. Then we feel ourselves to make sure that we exist ourselves. It was certainly to him that the words were spoken, but he himself was somebody else. He no longer had his jacket on, or his esclavine of leather. He had a waistcoat of cloth, of silver, and a satin coat which he touched and found to be embroidered. He felt a heavy purse in his waistcoat pocket. A pair of velvet trunk hose covered his clown's tights. He wore shoes with high red heels. As they had been brought him to this palace, so had they changed his dress. The man resumed. "Will your lordship deign to remember this? I am called Barkilphedro. I am clerk to the Admiralty. It was I who opened Hardquanonne's flask and drew your destiny out of it. Thus, in the Arabian Nights, a fisherman releases a giant from a bottle." Gwynplaine fixed his eyes on the smiling face of the speaker. Barkilphedro continued. "Besides this place, my lord, Hunkerville House, which is large, is yours. You own Clancharlie Castle, from which you take your title, and which was a fortress in the time of Edward the Elder. You have 19 bailiwicks belonging to you, with their villages and their inhabitants. This puts under your banner, as a lord and a nobleman, about 80,000 vassals and tenants. At Clancharlie you are a judge of all, both of goods and of persons, and you hold your baron's court. The king has no right which you have not, except the privilege of coining money. The king, designated by the Norman law as chief seigneur, has justice, court, and coin. Coin is money. So that you, excepting in this last, are as much a king in your lordship as he is in his kingdom. You have the right, as a baron, to a gibbet with 4 pillars in England, and as a marquis to a scaffold with 7 posts in Sicily. That of the mere lord having 2 pillars, that of a lord of the manor 3, and that of the duke 8. You are styled prince in the ancient charters of Northumberland. You are related to the Viscounts Valentia in Ireland, whose name is Power, and to the Earls of Umfraville in Scotland, whose name is Angus. You are chief of a clan like Campbell, Ardmannach, and MacCullumore. You have 8 barons' courts, Reculver, Baston, Halkerders, Homble, Morecambe, Drundrath, Trenwardrath, and others. You have a right over the turf-cutting of Pinnenmore, and over the alabaster quarries near Trent. Moreover, you own all the country of Penneth Chase, and you have a mountain with an ancient town on it. The town is called Vineconton. The mountain is called Moylinley. All which gives you an income of 40,000 pounds a year. That is to say, 40 times and 5 and 20,000 francs, with which a Frenchman is satisfied. Whilst Barkilphedro spoke, Gwynplaine, in a crescendo of stupor, remembered the past. Memory is a gulf that a word can move to its lowest depths. Gwynplaine knew all the words pronounced by Barkilphedro. They were written in the last lines of the 2 scrolls which lined the van in which his childhood had been passed, and, from so often letting his eyes wander over them mechanically, he knew them by heart. On reaching a forsaken orphan, the travelling caravan at Weymouth, he had found the inventory of the inheritance which awaited him. And in the morning, when the poor little boy awoke, the first thing spelt by his careless and unconscious eyes was his own title and its possessions. It was a strange detail, added to all his other surprises, that during 15 years rolling around highway to highway, the clown of a traveling theatre, earning his bread day by day, picking up farthings and living on crumbs, he should have traveled with the inventory of his fortune placarded over his misery. Barkilphedro touched the casket on the table with his forefingers. My lord, this casket contains 2,000 guineas which Her Gracious Majesty the Queen has sent you for your present wants. Gwynplaine made a movement. That shall be for my father Ursus, he said. So be it, my lord, said Barkilphedro. Ursus at the Tadcaster Inn. The sergeant of the coif, who accompanied us hither and is about to return immediately, will carry them to him. Perhaps I may go to London myself. In that case, I will take charge of it. Oh, I shall take them to him myself, said Gwynplaine. Barkilphedro's smile disappeared, and he said, Impossible. There is an impressive inflection of voice which, as it were, underlines the words. Barkilphedro's tone was thus emphasized. He paused, so as to put a full stop after the word he had just uttered. Then he continued, with the peculiar and respectful tone of a servant who feels that he is master. My lord, you are 23 miles from London, at Corleone Lodge, your court residence, contiguous to the royal castle of Windsor. You are here unknown to anyone. You were brought here in a close carriage, which was awaiting you at the gate of the jail at Southwark. The servants who introduced you into this palace are ignorant who you are, but they know me, and that is sufficient. You may possibly have been brought to these apartments by means of a private key which is in my possession. There are people in the house asleep, and it is not an hour to awaken them. Hence, we have time for an explanation, which, nevertheless, will be short. I have been commissioned by Her Majesty. As he spoke, Barkilphedro began to turn over the leaves of some bundles of papers which were lying near the casket. My lord, here is your patent of peerage. Here is that of your Sicilian marquisate. These are the parchments and title deeds of your 8 baronies, with the seals of 11 kings from Baldret, King of Kent, to James VI of Scotland, and first of England and Scotland united. Here are your letters of precedence. Here are your rent royals and titles and descriptions of your fiefs, freeholds, dependencies, lands, and domains. That which you see above your head in the emblazonment on the ceiling are your 2 coronets, the circlet with pearls for the baron, and the circlet with strawberry leaves for the marquis. Here in the wardrobe is your peer's robe of red velvet, bordered with ermine. Today, only a few hours since, the Lord Chancellor and the Deputy Earl Marshal of England, informed of the result of your confrontation with the Comprachicco Harkonnen, have taken Her Majesty's commands. Her Majesty has signalled them, according to her royal will, which is the same as the law. All formalities have been compiled with. Tomorrow, and no later than tomorrow, you will take your seat in the House of Lords, where they have for some days been deliberating on a bill presented by the Crown, having for its object the augmentation of 100,000 pounds sterling yearly of the annual allowance to the Duke of Cumberland, husband of the Queen. You will be able to take part in the debate. Barkilphedro paused, breathed slowly, and resumed. However, nothing is yet settled. A man cannot be a peer of England without his own consent. All can be annulled and disappear, unless you acquiesce. An event nipped in the bud ere it ripens often occurs in state policy. My lord, up to this time silence has been preserved on what has occurred. The House of Lords will not be informed of the facts until tomorrow. Secrecy has been kept about the whole matter for reasons of state, which are of such importance that the influential persons, who alone are at this moment cognizant of your existence and of your rights, will forget them immediately should reasons of state command their being forgotten. That which is in darkness may remain in darkness. It is easy to wipe you out, the more so as you have a brother, the natural son of your father, and of a woman who, afterwards, during the exile of your father, becomes mistress to King Charles II, which accounts for your brother's high position at court. For it is to this brother, bastard though he be, that your peerage would revert. Do you wish this? I cannot think so. Well, all depends on you. The queen must be obeyed. You will not quit the house till tomorrow in a royal carriage, and to go to the House of Lords. My lord, will you be a peer of England? Yes or no? The queen has designs for you. She destines you for an alliance almost royal. Lord Fermain Clancharlie. This is the decisive moment. Destiny never opens one door without shutting another. After a certain step in advance, to step back is impossible. Whoso enters into transfiguration leaves behind him evanescence. My lord, Gwynplaine is dead. Do you understand? Gwynplaine trembled from head to foot. Then he recovered himself. Yes, he said. Barkilphedro, smiling, bowed, placed the casket under his cloak, and left the room. End of chapter 4. Okay, so this one, Gwynplaine is just like, I don't understand what's going on. A lot is happening. Where am I? Whose clothes are these? Like, that sort of thing. And Barkilphedro's like, look, dude, nobody knows that you're here. And they can continue not knowing that you're here, but these are all the things that you're turning down. And he like lists all of them. He's like, this is, your monies, whatever. And Gwynplaine is like, oh, that'll go to my dad, Ursus. And Gwynplaine is like, or not Gwynplaine. Barkilphedro is like, all right, well, I will take him there. I will take this to him. And Gwynplaine's like, well, like, I can do it. And he's like, no, you can't. We are too far away. How dare you think that you can just leave? And we can't wake anybody up. Sorry, everybody's sleeping. And so Barkilphedro is still going down the line of like why Gwynplaine needs to accept who he is. And he's just like, Gwynplaine is dead. From now on, you are Fermain Clancharlie. Do you get it? And Gwynplaine is like, yes. And that's where we ended. Chapter 5. We think we remember, we forget. Whence arise those strange, visible changes which occur in the soul of man? Gwynplaine had been at the same moment raised to a summit and cast into an abyss. His head swam with double giddiness, the giddiness of ascent and descent, a fatal combination. He felt himself ascend and felt not his fall. It is appalling to see a new horizon. A perspective affords suggestions, not always good ones. He had before him the fairy glade, a snare perhaps, seen through opening clouds and showing the blue depths of sky, so deep that they are obscure. He was on the mountain whence he could see all the kingdoms of the earth, a mountain all the more terrible that it is a visionary one. Those who are on its apex are in a dream. Palaces, castles, power, opulence, all human happiness extending as far as eye could reach. A map of enjoyments spread out to the horizon, a sort of radiant geography of which he was the center. A perilous mirage. Imagine what must have been the haze of such a vision, not led up to, not attained to as by the gradual steps of a ladder, but reached without transition and without previous warning. A man going to sleep in a mole's burrow and awakening on the top of Strasbourg steeple. Such was the state of Gwynplaine. Giddiness is a dangerous kind of glare, particularly that which bears you a once towards the day and towards the night, performing two whirlwinds, one opposed to the other. He saw too much and not enough. He saw all and nothing. His state was what the author of this book has somewhere expressed as the blind man dazzled. Gwynplaine, left by himself, began to walk with long strides. A bubbling precedes an explosion. Notwithstanding his agitation in this impossibility of keeping still, he meditated. His mind liquefied as it boiled. He began to recall things to his memory. It is surprising how we find that we have heard so clearly that to which we scarcely listened. The declaration of the shipwrecked men, read by the sheriff in the Southwark cell, came back to him clearly and intelligibly. He recalled every word. He saw under it his whole infancy. Suddenly, he stopped, his hands clasped behind his back, looking up to the ceiling, the sky, no matter what, whatever was above him. "Quits!" he cried. He felt like one whose head rises out of the water. It seemed to him that he saw everything, the past, the future, the present, in the ascension of a sudden flash of light. "Oh!" he cried, for there are cries in the depths of thought. "Oh, it was so, was it? I was a lord. All is discovered. They stole, betrayed, destroyed, abandoned, disinherited, murdered me. The corpse of my destiny floated 15 years on the sea. All at once it touched the earth, and it started up, erect and living. I am reborn. I am born. I felt under my rags that the breast there palpitating was not that of a wretch, and when I looked on crowds of men I felt that they were the flocks, and that I was not the dog, but the shepherd. Shepherds of the people, leaders of men, guides and masters, such were my fathers, and what they were I am. I am a gentleman, and I have a sword. I am a baron, and I have a casque. I am a marquis, and I have a plume. I am a peer, and I have a coronet. Lo, they deprived me of all this. I dwelt in light, and they flung me into darkness. Those who proscribed the Father sold the Son. When my father was dead, they took from beneath his head the stone of exile which he had placed for his pillow, and tying it to my neck, they flung me into a sewer. Oh, those scoundrels who tortured my infancy! Yes, they rise and move in the depths of my memory. Yes, I see them again. I was that morsel of flesh pecked to pieces on a tomb by a flight of crows. I bled and cried under all those horrible shadows. Lo, it was there that they precipitated me, under the crush of those who come and go, under the trampling feet of men, under the undermost of the human race, lower than the serf, baser than the serving man, lower than the felon, lower than the slave, at the spot where chaos becomes a sewer in which I was engulfed. It is from thence that I come. It is from this that I rise. It is from this that I am risen. And here I am now. Quits. He sat down. He rose, clasped his head with his hands, began to pace the room again, and his tempestuous monologue continued within him. Where am I? On the summit? Where is it that I have just alighted? On the highest peak? This pinnacle, this grandeur, this dome of the world, this great power is my home. This temple is in the air. I am one of the gods. I live in inaccessible heights. This supremacy, which I looked up to from below, and from whence emanated such rays of glory that I shut my eyes. This ineffaceable peerage, this impregnable fortress of the fortunate, I enter. I am in it. I am of it. Ah, what a decisive turn of the wheel. I was below. I am on high forever. Behold me, a lord. I shall have a scarlet robe. I shall have an earl's coronet on my head. I shall assist at the coronation of kings. They will take the oath from my hands. I shall judge princes and ministers. I shall exist. From the depths into which I was thrown, I have rebounded to the zenith. I have palaces in town and country, houses, gardens, chases, forests, carriages, millions. I will give fetes. I will make laws. I shall have the choices of joys and pleasures, and the vagabond Gwynplaine, who had not the right to gather a flower in the grass, may pluck the stars from heaven. Melancholy overshadowing of a soul's brightness. Thus it was that in Gwynplaine, who had been a hero, and perhaps had not ceased to be one, moral greatness gave way to material splendor. A lamentable transition. Virtue broken down by a troop of passing demons, a surprise made on the weak side of man's fortress. All the inferior circumstances called by men superior ambition, the purblind desires of instinct, passions, covetousness, driven far from Gwynplaine by the wholesome restraints of misfortune, took tumultuous possession of his generous heart. And from what had this arisen? From the discovery of a parchment in a waif drifted by the sea. Conscience may be violated by a chance attack. Gwynplaine drank in great draughts of pride, and it dulled his soul. Such is the poison of that fatal wine. Giddiness invaded him. He more than consented to its approach. He welcomed it. This was the effect of previous and long-continued thirst. Are we an accomplice of the cup which deprives us of reason? He had always vaguely desired this. His eyes had always turned towards the great. To watch is to wish. The eaglet is not born in the eyrie for nothing. Now, however, at moments, it seemed to him the simplest thing in the world that he should be a lord. A few hours only had passed, and yet the past of yesterday seemed so far off. Gwynplaine had fallen into the ambuscade of better, who is the enemy of good. Better and good are both capital. Unhappy is he of whom we say, how lucky he is. Adversity is more easily resisted than prosperity. We rise more perfect from ill fortune than from good. There is a Charybdis of poverty and a Scylla in riches. Those who remain erect under the thunderbolt are prostrated by the flash. Thou who standest without shrinking on the verge of a precipice, fear lest thou be carried up on the innumerable wings of mists and dreams. The ascent which elevates will dwarf thee. In apotheosis has a sinister power of degradation. It is not easy to understand what is good luck. Chance is nothing but a disguise. Nothing deceives so much as the face of fortune. Is she providence? Is she fatality? A brightness may not be a brightness because light is truth, and a gleam may be a deceit. You believe that it lights you, but no. It sets you on fire. At night, a candle made of mean tallow becomes a star if placed in an opening in the darkness. A moth flies to it. In what measure is the moth responsible? The sight of the candle fascinates the moth as the eye of the serpent fascinates the bird. Is it possible that the bird and the moth should resist the attraction? Is it possible that the leaf should resist the wind? Is it possible that the stone should refuse obedience to the laws of gravitation? These are material questions, which are moral questions as well. After he had received the letter of Duchess, Gwynplaine had recovered himself. The deep love in his nature had resisted it. But the storm, having wearied itself on one side of the horizon, burst out on the other. For in destiny, as in nature, there are successive convulsions. The first shock loosens, the second uproots. Alas, how do the oaks fall? Thus, he who, when a child of 10, stood alone on the shore of Portland, ready to give battle, who had looked steadfastly at all the combatants whom he had to encounter, the blast which bore away the vessel in which he had expected to embark, the gulf which had swallowed up the plank, the yawning abyss of which the menace was its retrocession, the earth which refused him a shelter, the sky which refused him a star, solitude without pity, obscurity without notice, ocean, sky, all the violence of one infinite space, and all the mysterious enigmas of another. He who had neither trembled nor fainted before the mighty hostility of the unknown. He who, still so young, had held his own with night, as Hercules of old had held his own with death. He who in the unequal struggle had thrown down this defiance, that he, a child, adopted a child, that he encumbered himself with a load when tired and exhausted, thus rendering himself an easier prey to the attacks on his weaknesses, and, as it were, himself unmuzzling the shadowy monsters in ambush around him. He who, a precocious warrior, had immediately, and from his first steps out of the cradle, struggled breast to breast with destiny. He whose disproportion with strife had not discouraged from striving. He who, perceiving in everything around him a frightful occultation of the human race, had accepted that eclipse, and proudly continued his journey. He who had known how to endure cold, thirst, hunger valiantly. He who, a pygmy in stature, had been a colossus in soul. This Gwynplaine, who had conquered the great terror of the abyss under its double form, tempest and misery, staggered under a breath. Vanity. Thus, when she has exhausted distress, nakedness, storms, catastrophes, agonies on an unflinching man, fatality begins to smile, and her victim, suddenly intoxicated, staggers. The smile of fatality. Can anything more terrible be imagined? It is the last resource of the pitiless treer of souls in his proof of man. The tiger, lurking in destiny, caresses man with a velvet paw. Sinister preparation, hideous gentleness in the monster. Every self-observer has detected within himself mental weakness coincident with aggrandizement. A sudden growth disturbs the system and produces fear. In Gwynplaine's brain was the giddy whirlwind of a crowd of new circumstances. All the light and shade of a metamorphosis, inexpressibly strange confrontations, the shock of the past against the future. Two Gwynplaines himself doubled. Behind, an infant in rags crawling through night. Wandering, shivering, hungry, provoking laughter. In front, a brilliant nobleman, luxurious, proud, dazzling all London. He was casting off one form and amalgamating himself with the other. He was casting the mountebank and becoming the peer. Change of skin is sometimes change of soul. Now and then the past seemed like a dream. It was complex, bad and good. He thought of his father. It was a poignant anguish never to have known his father. He tried to picture him to himself. He thought of his brother, of whom he had just heard. And he had a family. Gwynplaine, he lost himself in fantastic dreams. He saw visions of magnificence. Unknown forms of solemn grandeur moved in mist before him. He heard flourishes of trumpets. And then, he said, I shall be eloquent. He pictured to himself a splendid entrance into the House of Lords. He should arrive full to the brim with new facts and ideas. What could he not tell them? What subjects he had accumulated? What an advantage to be in the midst of them, a man who had seen, touched, undergone, and suffered, who could cry aloud to them, I have been near everything from which you are so far removed. He would hurl reality in the face of those patricians crammed with illusions. They should tremble, for it would be the truth. They would applaud, for it would be grand. What a triumph! And, building up these fantasies in his mind, clear and confused at the same time, he had attacks of delirium, sinking on the first seat he came to, sometimes drowsy, sometimes starting up. He came and went, looked at the ceiling, examined the coronets, studied vaguely the hieroglyphs of the emblazonment, felt the velvet of the walls, moved the chairs, turned over the parchments, read the names, spelt out the titles Buxton, Humble, Grundraith, Hunkerville, Clancharlie, compared the wax. The comparison felt the twist of silk appended to the royal privy seal, approached the window, listened to the splash of the fountain, contemplated the statues, counted with the patience of a solemnibust the columns of marble, and said, it is real. He then touched his satin clothes and asked himself, is it I? Yes. He was torn by an inward tempest. In this whirlwind, did he feel faintness and fatigue? Did he drink, eat, sleep? If he did so, he was unconscious of the fact. In certain violent situations, instinct satisfies itself, according to its requirements, unconsciously. Besides, his thoughts were less thoughts than mists. At the moment that the black flame of an eruption disgorges itself from depths full of boiling lava, has the crater any consciousness of the flocks which crop the grass at the foot of the mountain? The hours passed. The dawn appeared and brought the day. A bright ray penetrated the chamber, and at the same instant broke on the soul of Gwynplaine. And Dea, said the light. That is both the end of the chapter and also the end of book the fifth. Okay, so in this one, Gwynplaine just comes to the realization and is just like, I'm a lord. I am real powerful. What I do, people have to listen to me. I have all of these properties and all of this money, and I'm going to be amazing. I'm going to wear amazing clothes. I'm just going to barge in, and I'm just going to start kicking butt and taking names. And then it hits him. He has a platform. And he's like, okay, well, I have lived in horrible situations. I've lived in the real world, and the aristocracy is so removed. I'm going to come in and I'm going to be like, you know what? These are the things that we could fix, and the people will love it, and the people will be amazed by how much we care and how many changes we're making for the better of their lives. And that is the question. Will they listen? A real question. Yeah, he can say all of those things. Exactly. He can say all of those things, but the real question is, are they willing to listen to that? Will they listen to him? Will the aristocracy make these changes? My guess, just a simple guess, no. I don't think they're going to be doing that. Aristocracy is definitely going to keep the poor people poor. I don't think they're going to be like, oh, yeah, there's people suffering. Well, had we known. Very idealistic. I love that for you, Gwynplaine. I'm sorry, Fermain. Love that for you. Very good guess, yeah. I just have a little feeling that the aristocracy is not gonna answer. Or not gonna listen. They might answer. They might be like, oh yeah, you're right, but they're not gonna change anything. Why would they, right? It doesn't immediately impact them. Why would they have to change anything? They have all of their furniture in purple velvet, so everything's fine. Everything's fine. I'm just wondering if Gwynplaine is going to change. If his personality, if he's going to be corrupted by having all of the niceties of being an aristocrat, and he's going to start being like Queen Anne or like Lady Hosiana, in which he just doesn't really care about people who are the have-nots. I wonder. I wonder. All right, so shall we? Book the sixth. Ursus under different aspects. Chapter 1. What the Misanthrope Said. After Ursus had seen Gwynplaine thrust within the gates of Southwark jail, he remained, haggard, in the corner from which he was watching. For a long time his ears were haunted by the grinding of the bolts and bars, which was like a howl of joy that one wretch more should be enclosed within them. He waited. What for? He watched. What for? Such inexorable doors, once shut, do not reopen so soon. They are tongue-tied by their stagnation in darkness and move with difficulty, especially when they have to give up a prisoner. Entrance is permitted. Exit is quite a different matter. Ursus knew this, but waiting is a thing which we have not the power to give up at our own will. We wait in our own despite. What we do disengages an acquired force, which maintains its action when its object has ceased, which keeps possession for us and holds us, and obliges us for some time longer to continue that which has already lost its motive. Hence the useless watch, the inert position that we have all held at times, the loss of time which every thoughtful man gives mechanically to that which has disappeared. None escape this law. We become stubborn in a sort of vague fury. We know not why we are in this place, but we remain there. That which we have begun actively we continue passively, with an exhausting tenacity from which we emerge overwhelmed. Ursus Scusums. Ursus, though differing from other men, was, as any other might have been, nailed to his post by that species of conscious reverie into which we are plunged by events all important to us, and in which we are impotent. He scrutinized by turns those two black walls, now the high one, then the low. Sometimes the door near which the ladder to the gibbet stood, then that surmounted by a death's head. It was as if he were caught in a vice, composed of a prison and a cemetery. This shunned and unpopular street was so deserted that he was unobserved. At length he left the arch under which he had taken shelter, a kind of chance sentry box, in which he had acted the watchman, and departed with slow steps. The day was declining, for his guard had been long. From time to time he turned his head and looked at the fearful wicket through which Gwynplaine had disappeared. His eyes were glassy and dull. He reached the end of the alley. Entered another, then another, retracing almost unconsciously the road which he had taken some hours before. At intervals he turned, as if he could still see the door of the prison, though he was no longer in the street in which the jail was situated. Step by step he was approaching Tarrinzeau Field. The lanes in the neighborhood of the fairground were deserted pathways between enclosed gardens. He walked along, his head bent down, by the hedges and ditches. All at once he halted, and drawing himself up, exclaimed, "So much the better." At the same time, he struck his fist twice on his head and twice on his thigh, thus proving himself to be a sensible fellow, who saw things in their right light. And then he began to growl inwardly, yet now and then raising his voice. "It is all right. Oh, the scoundrel, the thief, the vagabond, the worthless fellow, the seditious scamp. It is his speeches about the government that have sent him there. He is a rebel. I was harboring a rebel. I am free of him, and lucky for me, he was comprising us, thrust into prison. Oh, so much the better. What excellent laws. Ungrateful boy. I who brought him up to give oneself so much trouble for this. Why should he want to speak and to reason? He mixed himself up in politics, the ass. As he handled pennies, he babbled about the taxes, about the poor, about the people, about what was no business of his. He permitted himself to make reflections on pennies. He commented wickedly and maliciously on the copper money of the kingdom. He insulted the farthings of her majesty. A farthing! Why, 'tis the same as the queen, a sacred effigy. Devil take it, a sacred effigy. Have we a queen? Yes or no? Then respect her verdigris. Everything depends on the government. One ought to know that. I have experience. I have. I know something. They may say to me, "But you give up politics, then?" Politics, my friend. I care as much for them as for the rough hide of an ass. I received, one day, a blow from a baronet's cane. I said to myself, "That is enough. I understand politics. The people have but a farthing. They give it. The queen takes it. The people thank her. Nothing can be more natural. It is for the peers to arrange the rest, their lordships, the lords spiritual and temporal. Oh, so Gwynplaine is locked up. So he is in prison. That is just as it should be. It is equitable, excellent, well merited, and legitimate. It is his own fault. To criticize is forbidden. Are you a lord, you idiot? The constable has seized him. The justice of the quorum has carried him off. The sheriff has him in custody. At this moment he is probably being examined by a sergeant of quaff. They pluck out your crimes, those clever fellows, imprisoned, my wag. So much the worse for him, so much the better for me. Faith, I am satisfied. I own frankly that fortune favors me. Of that folly was I guilty when I picked up that little boy and girl? We are so quiet before. The wolf and I. What had they to do in my caravan? The little blackguards. Didn't I brood over them when they were young? Didn't I draw them along with my harness? Pretty foundlings indeed. He as ugly as sin, and she blind of both eyes. Where was the use of depriving myself of anything for their sakes? The beggars grow up, forsooth, and make love to each other. The flirtations of the deformed. It was to that we had come. The toad and the mole, quite an ideal. That was what went on in my household, all which was sure to end by going before the justice. The toad talked politics, but now I am free of him. When the wapentake came, I was at first a fool. One always doubts one's own good luck. I believed that I did not see what I did see. That is, that it was impossible, that it was a nightmare, that a daydream was playing me a trick. But no, nothing could be truer. It is all clear. Gwynplaine is really in prison. It is a stroke of Providence. Praise be to it. He was the monster who, with the row he made, drew attention to my establishment and denounced my poor wolf. Be off, Gwynplaine, and see, I am rid of both. 2 birds killed with 1 stone, because Dea will die, now that she can no longer see Gwynplaine, for she sees him, the idiot. She will have no object in life. She will say, "What am I to do in the world? Goodbye. To the devil with both of them. I always hated the creatures. Die, Dea. Oh, I am quite comfortable." All right, so That's the end of chapter 1. We are back to Ursus, and Ursus had just seen Gwynplaine and the quorum go into the prison, and he knows terrible things happen there. So he is walking back, and he is like, it's fine. I should have known that this was coming. Gwynplaine's a terrible person. He talks about politics all the time, which is what got him in trouble, and I never wanted to take him in anyway, so everything works out fine. But of course, Ursus is like super concerned and worried about him. But that's just how Ursus talks. Chapter 2. What he did. He returned to the Tadcaster Inn. It struck 6:30. It was a little before twilight. Master Nicholas stood on his doorstep. He had not succeeded since the morning in extinguishing the terror which still showed on his scarred face. He perceived Ursus from afar. "Well?" he cried. "Well, what? Is Gwynplaine coming back? It is full time. The public will soon be coming. Shall we have the performance of the Laughing Man this evening?" "I am the Laughing Man," said Ursus, and he looked at the tavern keeper with a loud chuckle. Then he went up to the first floor, opened the window next to the sign of the inn, leant over towards the placard about Gwynplaine, the Laughing Man, and the bill of chaos vanquished, unnailed the one, tore down the other, put both under his arm, and descended. Master Nicholas followed him with his eyes. "Why do you unhook that?" Ursus burst into a second fit of laughter. "Why do you laugh?" said the tavern keeper. "I am re-entering private life." Master Nicholas understood, and gave an order to his lieutenant, the boy Govicum, to announce to everyone who should come that there would be no performance that evening. He took from the door the box made out of a cask, where they received the entrance money, and rolled it into a corner of the lower sitting-room. A moment after, Ursus entered the green box. He put the 2 signs away in a corner, and entered what he called the woman's wing. Dea was asleep. She was on her bed, dressed as usual, excepting that the body of her gown was loosened, as when she was taking her siesta. Near her, Venus and Phoebe were sitting, one on a stool, and the other on the ground, musing. Notwithstanding the lateness of the hour, they had not dressed themselves in their goddess's gauze, which was a sign of deep discouragement. They had remained in their drugget petticoats and their dress of coarse cloth. Ursus looked at Dea. "She is rehearsing for a longer sleep," murmured he. Then, addressing Phoebe and Venus, "You both know all. The music is over. You may put your trumpets into the drawer. You did well not to equip yourself as deities. You look ugly enough as you are. But you were quite right. Keep on your petticoats. No performance tonight, nor tomorrow, nor the day after tomorrow. No Gwynplaine. Gwynplaine is clean gone." Then he looked at Dea again. "What a blow to her this will be. It will be like blowing out a candle." He inflated his cheeks. "Puff. Nothing more." Then, with a little dry laugh, "Losing Gwynplaine, she loses all. It would be just as if I were to lose the wolf. It will be worse. She will feel more lonely than anyone else could. The blind wade through more sorrow than we do." He looked out the window at the end of the room. "How the days lengthen. It is not dark at 7 o'clock. Nevertheless, we will light up." He struck the steel and lighted the lamp which hung from the ceiling of the green box. Then he leaned over Dea. "She will catch cold. You have unlaced her bodice too low. There is a proverb, 'Though April skies be bright, keep all your wrappers tight.'" Seeing a pin shining on the floor, he picked it up and pinned up her sleeve. Then he paced the green box, gesticulating. "I am in full possession of my faculties. I am lucid, quite lucid. I consider this occurrence quite proper, and I approve of what has happened. When she awakes, I will explain everything to her clearly. The catastrophe will not be long in coming. No more Gwynplaine. Good night, Dea. How well all has been arranged. Gwynplaine in prison, Dea in the cemetery. They will be vis-a-vis. A dance of death. A dance of death. Two destinies going off the stage at once. Pack up the dresses, fasten the valise. For valise, read coffin. It was just what was best for both of them. Dea without eyes, Gwynplaine without a face. On high, the Almighty will restore sight to Dea and beauty to Gwynplaine. Death puts things to rights. All will be well. Phoebe, Venus, hang up your tambourines on the nail. Your talents for noise will go to rust, my beauties. No more playing, no more trumpeting. Chaos vanquished is vanquished. The Laughing Man is done for. Tarantantara is dead. Dea sleeps on. She does well. If I were she, I would never wake. Oh, she will soon fall asleep again. A skylark like her takes very little killing. This comes of meddling with politics. What a lesson. Governments are right. Gwynplaine to the sheriff, Dea to the gravedigger. Parallel cases. Instructive symmetry. I hope the tavern keeper has barred the door. We are going to die tonight, quietly, at home, between ourselves. Not I nor Homo, but Dea. As for me, I shall continue to roll on in the caravan. I belong to the meanderings of vagabond life. I shall dismiss these two women. I shall not keep even one of them. I have a tendency to become an old scoundrel. A maidservant in the house of a libertine is like a loaf of bread on the shelf. I decline the temptation. It is not becoming at my age. Turbis nihilus amor. I will follow my way alone with my wolf. How astonished Homo will be. Where is Gwynplaine? Where is Dea? Oh, comrade, here we are once more alone together. Plague take it. I'm delighted. Their bucolics were an encumbrance. Oh, that scamp Gwynplaine, who is never coming back. He has left us stuck here. I say, all right. And now, 'tis Dea's turn. That won't be long. I like things to be done with. I would not snap my fingers to stop her dying. Her dying, I tell you. See, she wakes. Dea opened her eyelids. Many blind persons shut them when they sleep. Her sweet, unwitting face wore all its usual radiance. She smiles, whispered Ursus, and I laugh. That is as it should be. Dea called. Phoebe, Venus, it must be the time for the performance. I think I have been asleep a long time. Come, dress me. Neither Phoebe nor Venus moved. Meanwhile, the ineffable blind took of Dea's eyes, met those of Ursus. He started. Well, he cried, what are you about? Venus, Phoebe, do you not hear your mistress? Are you deaf? Quick, the play is going to begin. The two women looked at Ursus in stupefaction. Ursus shouted. Do you not hear the audience coming in? Phoebe, dress Dea. Venus, take your tambourine. Phoebe was obedient. Venus, passive. Together they personified submission. Their master, Ursus, had always been to them an enigma. Never to be understood is a reason for being always obeyed. They simply thought he had gone mad, and did as they were told. Phoebe took down the costume, and Venus the tambourine. Phoebe began to dress Dea. Ursus let down the door curtain of the women's room, and from behind the curtain continued. Look there, Gwynplaine. The court is already more than half full of people. They are in heaps in the passages. What a crowd. And you say that Phoebe and Venus look as they did not see them. How stupid the gypsies are. What fools they are in Egypt. Don't lift the curtain from the door. Be decent. Dea is dressing. He paused, and suddenly they heard an exclamation. How beautiful Dea is. It was the voice of Gwynplaine. Phoebe and Venus started and turned round. It was the voice of Gwynplaine, but in the mouth of Ursus. Ursus, by a sign which he made through the door ajar, forbade the expression of any astonishment. Then, again taking the voice of Gwynplaine, Angel. Then he replied in his own voice, Dea, an angel, you are a fool, Gwynplaine. No mammifer can fly except the bats. Then he added, Look here, Gwynplaine. Let the wolf loose. That will be more to the purpose. And he descended the ladder of the green box very quickly, with the agile spring of Gwynplaine imitating his step so that Dea could hear it. In the court he addressed the boy, whom the occurrences of the day had made idle and inquisitive. "Spread out both your hands," said he in a loud voice, and he poured a handful of pence into them. Govicum was grateful for his munificence. Ursus whispered in his ear, "Boy, go into the yard. Jump, dance, knock ball, whistle, coo, neigh, applaud, stamp your feet, burst out laughing, break something." Master Nicholas, saddened and humiliated at seeing the folks who had come to see the laughing man turned back and crowding towards other caravans, had shut the door of the inn. He had even given up the idea of selling any beer or spirits that evening, that he might have to answer no awkward questions, and quite overcome by the sudden close of the performance, was looking, with his candle in his hand, into the court from the balcony above. Ursus, taking the precaution of putting his voice between parentheses fashioned by adjusting the palms of his hands to his mouth, cried out to him, "Sir, do as your boy is doing. Yelp, bark, howl." He reascended the steps of the green box and said to the wolf, "Talk, as much as you can." Then, raising his voice, "What a crowd there is! We shall have a crammed performance." In the meantime, Vinos played the tambourine. Ursus went on. "Dea is dressed. Now we can begin. I am sorry they have admitted so many spectators. How thickly packed they are. Look, Gwynplaine, what a mad mob it is. I will bet that today we shall take more money than we have ever done yet. Come, gypsies, play up, both of you. Come here. Phoebe, take your clarion. Good. Vinos, drum on your tambourine. Fling it up and catch it again. Phoebe, put yourself into the attitude of fame. Young ladies, you have too much on. Take off those jackets. Replace stuff by gauze." The public liked to see the female form exposed. Let the moralists thunder. A little indecency? Devil take it. What of that? Look voluptuous and rush into wild melodies. Snort, blow, whistle, flourish, play the tambourine. What a number of people, my poor Gwynplaine. He interrupted himself. "Gwynplaine, help me. Let down the platform." He spread out his pocket handkerchief. "But first, let me roar in my rag." And he blew his nose violently, as a ventriloquist ought. Having returned his handkerchief to his pocket, he drew the pegs out of the pulleys, which creaked as usual as the platform was let down. "Gwynplaine, do not draw the curtain until the performance begins. We are not alone. You two come in front. Music, ladies! Turn, turn, turn! A pretty audience we have! The dregs of the people! Good heavens!" The two gypsies, stupidly obedient, placed themselves in their usual corners of the platform. Then Ursus became wonderful. It was no longer a man, but a crowd. Obliged to make abundance out of emptiness, he called to aid his prodigious powers of ventriloquism. The whole orchestra of human and animal voices which was within him he called into tumult at once. He was legion. Anyone with his eyes closed could have imagined that he was in a public place on some day of rejoicing, or in some sudden popular riot. A whirlwind of clamor proceeded from Ursus. He sang, he shouted, he talked, he coughed, he spat, he sneezed, took snuff, talked and responded, put questions and gave answers all at once. The half-uttered syllables ran into one another. In the court, untenanted by a single spectator, were heard men, women, and children. It was a clear confusion of tumult. Strange laughter wound, vapor-like, through the noise, the chirping of birds, the swearing of cats, the wailing of children at the breast. The indistinct tones of drunken men were to be heard, and the growls of dogs under the feet of people who stamped on them. The cries came from far and near, from top to bottom, from the upper boxes to the pit. The whole was in uproar. The detail was a cry. Ursus clapped his hands, stamped his feet, threw his voice to the end of the court, and then made it come from underground. It was both stormy and familiar. It passed from a murmur to a noise, from a noise to a tumult, from a tumult to a tempest. He was himself. Everyone else. Alone and polyglot. As there are optical illusions, there are also auricular illusions. That which Proteus did to sight, Ursus did to hearing. Nothing could be more marvelous than his facsimile of multitude. From time to time, he opened the door of the woman's apartment and looked at Dea. Dea was listening. On his part, the boy exerted himself to the utmost. Venus and Phoebe trumpeted conscientiously, and took turns with the tambourine. Master Nicholas, the only spectator, quietly made himself the same explanation as they did, that Ursus was gone mad, which was, for that matter, but another sad item added to his misery. The good tavern keeper growled out, "What insanity!" And he was serious as a man might well be who has the fear of the law before him. Govicum, delighted at being able to help in making a noise, exerted himself almost as much as Ursus. It amused him, and, moreover, it earned him pence. The wolf was pensive. In the midst of the tumult, Ursus now and then uttered such words as these. "Just as usual, Gwynplaine. There is a cabal against us. Our rivals are undermining our success. Tumult is the seasoning of triumph. Besides, there are too many people. They are uncomfortable. The angles of their neighbors' elbows do not dispose them to good nature. I hope the benches will not give way. We shall be the victims of an incensed population. Oh, if our friend Tom Jim Jack were only here! But he never comes now. Look at those heads rising one above the other. Those who are forced to stand don't look very well pleased, though the great Galen produced it to be strengthening. We will shorten the entertainment. As only Chaos Vanquished was announced in the playbill, we will not play Ursus versus. There will be something gained in that. What an uproar, or blind turbulence of the masses. They will do us some damage. However, they can't go on like this. We should not be able to play. No one can catch a word of the piece. I'm going to address them. Gwynplaine, draw the curtain a little aside. Gentlemen," here Ursus addressed himself with a shrill and feeble voice, "down with that old fool." Then he answered in his own voice, "It seems that the mob insult me. Cicero is right. Plebs vex urbis. Never mind. We will admonish the mob, though I shall have a great deal of trouble to make myself heard. I will speak, notwithstanding. Man, do your duty. Gwynplaine, look at that scald grinding her teeth down there." Ursus made a pause, in which he placed a gnashing of his teeth. The wolf, provoked, added a second, and Govicum a third. Ursus went on. "The women are worse than the men. The moment is unpropitious. But it doesn't matter. Let us try the power of speech. An eloquent speech is never out of place. Listen, Gwynplaine, to my attractive exordium. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a bear. I take off my head to address you. I humbly appeal to you for silence." Ursus, lending a cry to the crowd, said, "Grumph!" Then he continued, "I respect my audience. Grumph is an epiphonema. 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 As good as any other. Welcome. You growlers, that you are all of the dregs of the people, I do not doubt. That in no way diminishes my esteem for you. A well-considered esteem. I have a profound respect for the bullies who honor me with their custom. There are deformed folks amongst you. They give me no offense. The lame and the humpbacked are works of nature. The camel is gibbous. The bison's back is humped. The badger's left legs are shorter than the right. That fact is decided by Aristotle in his treatise on the walking of animals. There are those amongst you who have but two shirts, one on his back and the other at the pawnbroker's. I know that to be true. Albuquerque pawned his mustache, and St. Denis his glory. To have debts is to have something. I revere your beggardom." Ursus cut short his speech, interrupting it in a deep bass voice by the shout, "Triple ass!" And he answered in his politest accent, "I admit I am a learned man. I do my best to apologize for it. I scientifically despise science. Ignorance is a reality on which we feed. Science is a reality on which we starve. In general, one is obliged to choose between two things, to be learned and grow thin, or to browse and to be an ass. Oh, gentlemen, browse. Science is not worth a mouthful of anything nice. I had rather eat a sirloin of beef than know that they call the psoas muscle. I have but one merit, a dry eye. Such as you see me, I have never wept. It must be owned that I have never been satisfied, never satisfied, not even with myself. I despise myself, but I submit this to the member of the opposition here present. If Ursus is only a learned man, Gwynplaine is an artist. He groaned again. Grumph, and resumed. Grumphel again. It is an objection. All the same, I pass it over. Near Gwynplaine, gentlemen and ladies, is another artist, a valued and distinguished personage who accompanies us. His lordship, Homo, formerly a wild dog, now a civilized wolf, and a faithful subject of her majesty's. Homo is a mine of deep and superior talent. Be attentive and watch. You are going to set Homo play as well as Gwynplaine, and you must do honor to art. That is an attribute of great nations. Are you men of the woods? I admit the fact. In that case, sylvae sunt consul digna. 2 artists are well worth 1 consul. All right. Someone has flung a cabbage stalk at me, but did not hit me. That will not stop my speaking. On the contrary, a danger evaded makes folks garrulous. Garrula pericula, says Juvenal. My hearers, there are amongst you drunken men and drunken women. Very well. The men are unwholesome. The women are hideous. You have all sorts of excellent reasons for stowing yourselves away here on the benches of the pothouse. Want of work, idleness, the spare time between 2 robberies, porter, ale, stout, malt, brandy, gin, and the attraction of one sex of the other for the other. What could be better? A wit prone to irony would find this a fair field, but I abstain. 'Tis luxury, so be it, but even an orgy should be kept within bounds. You are excited, but noisy. You imitate successfully the cries of beasts, but what would you say if, when you were making love to a lady, I passed my time in barking at you? It would disturb you, and so it disturbs us. I order you to hold your tongues. Art is as respectable as debauch. I speak to you civilly. He apostrophized himself. May the fever strangle you with your eyebrows, like the beard of rye. And he replied, Honorable gentlemen, let the rye alone. It is impious to insult the vegetables by likening them either to human creatures or animals. Besides, the fever does not strangle. 'Tis a false metaphor. For pity's sake, keep silence. Allow me to tell you that you are slightly wanting in the repose which characterizes the true English gentleman. I see that some amongst you who have shoes out of which their toes are peeping take advantage of the circumstance to rest their feet on the shoulders of those who are in front of them, causing the ladies to remark that the soles of shoes divide always at the part at which is the head of the metatarsal bones. Show more of your hands and less of your feet. I perceive scamps who plunge their ingenious fists into the pockets of their foolish neighbors. Dear pickpockets, have a little modesty. Fight those next to you if you like. Do not plunder them. You will vex them less by blackening an eye than by lightening their purses of a penny. Break their noses if you like. The shopkeeper thinks more of his money than of his beauty. Barring this, accept my sympathies, for I am not pedantic enough to blame thieves. Evil exists. Everyone endures it. Everyone inflicts it. No one is exempt from the vermin of his sins. That's what I keep saying. Have we not all our itch? I myself have made mistakes. Plaudite, civis? Ursus uttered a long groan, which he overpowered by these concluding words. My lords and gentlemen, I see that my address has unluckily displeased you. I take leave of your hisses for a moment. I shall put on my head, and the performance is going to begin. He dropped his oratorical tone and resumed his usual voice. Close the curtains. Leave me breathe. I have spoken like honey. I have spoken well. My words were like velvet, but they were useless. What do you think of all this scum, Gwynplaine? How well may we estimate the ills which England has suffered for the last 40 years through the ill temper of these irritable and malicious spirits? The ancient Britons were warlike. These are melancholy and learned. They glory in despising the laws and contemning royal authority. I have done all that human eloquence can do. I have been prodigal of metomnics, metomnics, as gracious as the blooming cheek of youth. Were they softened by them? I doubt it. What can affect a people who eat so extraordinarily, who stupefy themselves by tobacco so completely that their literary men often write their works with a pipe in their mouths? Never mind. Let us begin the play. The ring of the curtain. The rings of the curtain were heard being drawn over the rod. The tambourines of the gypsies were still. Ursus took down his instrument, executed his prelude, and said in a low tone, "Alas, Gwynplaine, how mysterious it is!" Then he flung himself down with the wolf. When he had taken down his instrument, he had also taken down from the nail a rough wig which he had, and which he had thrown on the stage in a corner within his reach. The performance of Chaos Vanquished took place as usual, minus only the effect of the blue light and the brilliancy of the fairies. The wolf played his best. At the proper moment Dea made her appearance, and, in her voice so tremulous and heavenly, invoked Gwynplaine. She extended her arms, feeling for that head. Ursus rushed at the wig, ruffled it, put it on, advanced softly, and holding his breath, his head bristled, thus under the hand of Dea. Then, calling all his art to his aid and copying Gwynplaine's voice, he sang with ineffable love the response of the monster to the call of the spirit. The imitation was so perfect that again the gypsies took for Gwynplaine, frightened at hearing without seeing him. Govicum, filled with astonishment, stamped, applauded, clapped his hands, producing an Olympian tumult, and himself laughed as if he had been a chorus of gods. This boy, it must be confessed, developed a rare talent for acting in audience. Phoebe and Venus, being automatons of which Ursus pulled the strings, rattled their instruments, composed of copper and ass's skin, their usual sign of the performance being over and of the departure of the people. Ursus rose, covered with perspiration. He said in a low voice to the wolf, "You see, it was necessary to gain time. I think we have succeeded. I have not acquitted myself badly. I, who have as much reason as anyone to go distracted. Gwynplaine may perhaps return tomorrow. It is useless to kill Dea directly. I can explain matters to you." He took off his wig and wiped his forehead. "I am a ventriloquist of genius," murmured he. "What talent I displayed! I have equaled Brabant, the ignastrumist of Francis I of France. Dea is convinced that Gwynplaine is here." "Ursus," said Dea, "where is Gwynplaine?" Ursus started and turned round. Dea was still standing at the back of the stage, alone under the lamp which hung from the ceiling. She was pale, with the pallor of a ghost. She added with an ineffable expression of despair, "I know. He has left us. He is gone. I always knew that he had wings." And raising her sightless eyes on high, she added, "When shall I follow?" End of chapter 2. Okay. So Ursus makes it back to the Tadcaster Inn, and he pulls down the signs announcing the play or the performances that are going to be had tonight. He tells the innkeeper, "We're not doing it. Turn everybody away." So the innkeeper basically shuts down for the night because he doesn't think that anybody's like actually going to come, and he doesn't want to serve drinks to people who are going to ask questions about the performance, so he just shuts down. And Ursus is like, "Well, I'm going to tell her. I'm going to tell Dea what's going on." And Dea is going to be so distraught that she's just going to die. It has to happen we're not performing, blah, blah, blah. And then Dea wakes up and he's like, all right, well, everybody get ready. We're going to perform. And so he uses his ventriloquism to play both his role and also Gwynplaine's role, but also he's heckling himself by being members of the audience, and he pays Govacum, who is the boy who also works at the inn, to like run around, make a lot of ruckus, pretend like he's part of the audience, and they are trying to make the audience loud and aggressive and like bigger than they've ever had before, which is, you don't have to go all in. It could have just been like a regular audience, but that's fine. Um, and so he's playing along, he's doing all of the things, he's doing his introduction. They decide that they're only going to do Chaos Vanquish. They're not going to do Ursus Versus, which is fine, blah, blah, blah. That's what the people came for, whatever. And so they do the whole performance. The Phoebe and Venus are just like, all right, well, he's lost his mind, but here we go. And they're just like playing the tambourine, doing their part, everything like that. And then at the end of the play, Ursus is like, well, hand it to myself. I am amazing. Like, Dea doesn't even know anything that's happened. Like, we're golden. And then Dea's like, Miss Scusi, where's Gwynplaine? And when can I follow him? So, all right. So that's a little sad, but I love that Ursus went to the trouble of doing all of those things. Like that's just like Ursus is like talks a big game about how he hates Gwynplaine, how he thinks he's a thief, a leech, all of these things, and also Dea. But he obviously cares about them so much to the point where he's trying to pretend as much as possible that things are normal so that he doesn't have to tell Dea and just like shatter her world because he knows that it will do that. And that's sweet. All right. Chapter 3. Complications. Ursus was stunned. He had not sustained the illusion. Was it the fault of ventriloquism? Certainly not. He had succeeded in deceiving Phoebe and Venus, who had eyes, although he had not deceived Dea, who was blind. It was because it was because Phoebe and Venus saw with their eyes, while Dea saw with her heart. He could not utter a word. He thought to himself, "Vos in lingua," and troubled man has an ox on his tongue. In his complex emotions, humiliation was the first which dawned on him. Ursus, driven out of his last resource, pondered. I lavish my onomatopsies, onomatopies, onomatopies in vain. Then, like every dreamer, he reviled himself. What a frightful failure! I wore myself out in a pure loss of imitative harmony. But what is to be done next? He looked at Dea. She was silent and grew paler every moment as she stood perfectly motionless. Her sightless eyes remained fixed in depths of thought. Fortunately, something happened. Ursus saw Master Nicholas in the yard, with a candle in his hand, beckoning to him. Master Nicholas had not assisted at the end of the phantom comedy played by Ursus. Someone had happened to knock at the door of the inn. Master Nicholas had gone to open it. There had been 2 knocks, and twice Master Nicholas had disappeared. Ursus, absorbed by his 100-voiced monologue, had not observed his absence. On the mute call of Master Nicholas, Ursus descended. He approached the tavern keeper. Ursus put his finger on his lips. Master Nicholas put his finger on his lips. The 2 looked at each other thus. Each seemed to say to the other, "We will talk, but we will hold our tongues." The tavern keeper silently opened the door of the lower room of the tavern. Master Nicholas entered. Ursus entered. There was no one there except these two. On the side, looking on the street, both doors and window shutters were closed. The tavern keeper pushed the door behind him and shut it in the face of the inquisitive Govicum. Master Nicholas placed the candle on the table. A low, whispering dialogue began. Master Ursus. Master Nicholas. I understand at last. Nonsense. You wished the poor blind girl to think that all going on as usual. There is no law against my being a ventriloquist. You are a clever fellow. No. It is wonderful how you manage all that you wish to do. I tell you it is not. Now I have something to tell you. Is it about politics? I don't know. Because in that case I should not listen to you. Look here. Whilst you were playing actors and audience by yourself, someone knocked at the door of the tavern. Someone knocked at the door. Yes. I don't like that. Nor I either. And then I opened it. Who was it that knocked? Someone who spoke to me. What did he say? I listened to him. What did you answer? Nothing. I came back to see you play. And? Someone knocked a second time. Who, the same person? No, another. Someone else to speak to you? Someone who said nothing. I like that better. I do not. Explain yourself, Master Nicholas. Guess who called the first time? I have no leisure to be in Oedipus. It was the proprietor of the circus. Over the way? Over the way. Whence comes all that fearful noise? Well? Well, Master Nicholas, he makes you a proposal. A proposal? A proposal. Why? Because you have an advantage over me, Master Nicholas. Just now you solved my enigma, and now I cannot understand yours. The proprietor of the circus commissioned me to tell you that he had seen the cortege of police pass this morning, and that he, the proprietor of the circus, wishes to prove that he is your friend, offers to buy of you, for £50, ready money, your caravan, the green box, your 2 horses, your trumpets, with the women that blow them, your play, with the blind girl who sings in it, your wolf, and yourself. Ursus smiled a haughty smile. Innkeeper, tell the proprietor of the circus that Gwynplaine is coming back. The innkeeper took something from a chair in the darkness, and turning towards Ursus with both arms raised, dangled from one hand a cloak, and from the other a leather esclavine, a felt hat, and a jacket. And Master Nicholas said, the man who knocked the second time was connected with the police. He came in and left without saying a word, and brought these things. Ursus recognized the esclavine, the jacket, the hat, and the cloak of Gwynplaine. End of chapter 3. That was a shorty, a goodie but a shorty. So it's the end, and Ursus is saved from answering Dea of where Gwynplaine is by Master Nicholas waving him over. Ursus goes over there, they go into this little room, close the door, everything's shut, and they're like whispering back and forth, and Nicholas is like, I know why you did this. That's great. And Ursus is like, okay, cool, thanks. What do you have to tell me? And Master Nicholas says that 2 people came to the door while all of this was happening. The second person to come gave an offer to basically buy everything. Buy everything, buy the entertainment, buy the people that are performing in it, buy the wolf, buy Ursus himself. And Ursus answers so confidently, like, no, I don't accept because Gwynplaine is coming back. And the second person brought proof that he wasn't going to be coming back. He had connections with the police, and so he brought along Gwynplaine's old clothes, so the hat, the cloak, all of these things that Gwynplaine owns and wore when he left, which we know that Gwynplaine is fine. He's, just they just changed his clothes when he was sleeping, which is weird. Don't do that. Um and that's where we're at. So, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen now? Let's see. Chapter 4. Monibus surdis campana muta. Ursus smoothed the felt of the hat, touched the cloth of the cloak, the serge of the coat, the leather of the esclavine, and no longer able to doubt whose garments they were, with a gesture at once brief and imperative, and without saying a word, pointed to the door of the inn. Master Nicholas opened it. Ursus rushed out of the tavern. Master Nicholas looked after him and saw Ursus run as fast as his old legs would allow, in the direction taken that morning by the wapentake who carried off Gwynplaine. A quarter of an hour afterwards, Ursus, out of breath, reached the little street in which stood the back wicket of the Southwark jail, which he had already watched so many hours. This alley was lonely enough at all hours, but if dreary during the day, it was portentous in the night. No one ventured through it after a certain hour. It seemed as though people feared that the walls should close in, and that if the prison or the cemetery took a fancy to embrace, they should be crushed in their clasp. Such are the effects of darkness. The pollard windows of the Rue Vauvert in Paris were thus ill-famed. It was said that during the night the stumps of those trees changed into great hands and caught hold of the passers-by. By instinct, the Southwark folks shunned, as we have already mentioned, this alley between a prison and a churchyard. Formerly it had been barricaded during the night by an iron chain, very uselessly, because the strongest chain which guarded the street was the terror it inspired. Ursus entered it resolutely. What intention possessed him? None. He came into the alley to seek intelligence. Was he going to knock at the gate of the jail? Certainly not. Such an expedient, at once fearful and vain, had no place in his brain. To attempt to introduce himself, to demand an explanation. What folly! Prisons do not open to those who wish to enter, any more than to those who desire to get out. Their hinges never turn except by law. Ursus knew this. Why, then, had he come there? To see. To see what? Nothing. Who can tell? Even to be opposite the gate through which Gwynplaine had disappeared was something. Sometimes the blackest and most rugged of walls whispers, and some light escapes through a cranny. A vague glimmering is now and then to be perceived through solid and somber piles of building. Even to examine the envelope of a fact may be to some purpose. The instinct of us all is to leave between the fact which interests us and ourselves but the thinnest possible cover. Therefore it was that Ursus returned to the alley in which the lower entrance to the prison was situated. Just as he entered it, he heard one stroke of the clock, then a second. Hold, thought he. Can it be midnight already? Mechanically he set himself to count. 3, 4, 5, he mused. At what long intervals this clock strikes. How slowly. 6, 7. Then he remarked, what a melancholy sound. 8, 9. Nothing can be more natural. It's dull work for a clock to live in a prison. 10. Besides, there is a cemetery. This clock sounds the hour to the living and eternity to the dead. 11. Alas, to strike the hour to him who is not free is also to chronicle an eternity. 12. He paused. Yes, it is midnight. The clock struck a 13th Stroke. Ursus shuddered. 13. Then followed a 14th. Then a 15th. What can this mean? The strokes continued at long intervals. Ursus listened. It is not the striking of a clock, it is the bell muta. No wonder I said how long it takes to strike midnight. This clock does not strike, it tolls. What fearful thing is about to take place? Formerly, all prisons and all monasteries had a bell called muta, reserved for melancholy occasions. La muta, the mute, was a bell which struck very low, as if doing its best not to be heard. Ursus had reached the corner which he had found so convenient for his watch, and whence he had been able, during a great part of the day, to keep his eye on the prison. The strokes followed each other at lugubrious intervals. A knell makes an ugly punctuation in space. It breaks the preoccupation of the mind into funereal paragraphs. A knell, like a man's death rattle, notifies an agony. If in the houses about the neighborhood where a knell is tolled, there are reveries straying in doubt, its sound cuts them into rigid fragments. A vague reverie is a sort of refuge. Some indefinable diffuseness is in anguish, allows now and then a ray of hope to pierce through it. A knell is precise and desolating. It concentrates this diffusion of thought, and precipitates the vapors in which anxiety seeks to remain in suspense. A knell speaks to each one in the sense of his own grief or of his own fear. Tragic bell, it concerns you. It is a warning to you. There is nothing so dreary as a monologue on which its cadence falls. The even returns of sound seem to show a purpose. What is it that this hammer, the bell, forges on the anvil of thought? Ursus counted, vaguely, and without motive, the tolling of the knell. Feeling that his thoughts were sliding from him, he made an effort not to let them slip into conjecture. Conjecture is an inclined plane on which we slip too far to be to our own advantage. Still, what was the meaning of the bell? He looked through the darkness in the direction in which he knew the gate of the prison to be. Suddenly, in that very spot which looked like a dark hole, a redness showed. The redness grew larger and became a light. There was no certainty about it. It soon took a form and angles. The gate of the jail had just turned on its hinges. The glow painted the arch and the jambs of the door. It was a yawning rather than an opening. A prison does not open. It yawns, perhaps from ennui. Through the gate passed a man with a torch in his hand. The bell rang on. Ursus felt his attention fascinated by two objects. He watched, his ear the knell, his eye the torch. Behind the first man, the gate, which had been ajar, enlarged the opening suddenly, and allowed egress to two other men. Then to a fourth. This fourth was the wapentake, clearly visible in the light of the torch. In his grasp was his iron staff. Following the wapentake, there filed and opened out below the gateway in order, 2 by 2, with the rigidity of a series of walking posts, ranks of silent men. This nocturnal procession stepped through the wicket in file, like a procession of penitents, without any solution of continuity, with a funereal care to make no noise, gravely, almost gently. A serpent issues from its hole with similar precautions. The torch threw out their profiles and attitudes into relief, fierce looks, sullen attitudes. Ursus recognized the faces of the police who had that morning carried off Gwynplaine. There was no doubt about it. They were the same. They were reappearing. Of course, Gwynplaine would also reappear. They had led him to that place. They would bring him back. It was all quite clear. Ursus strained his eyes to the utmost. Would they set Gwynplaine at liberty? The files of police flowed from the low arch very slowly and, as it were, drop by drop. The toll of the bell was uninterrupted and seemed to mark their steps. On leaving the prison, the procession turned their backs on Ursus, went to the right, into the bend of the street opposite to that in which he was posted. A second torch shone under the gateway, announcing the end of the procession. Ursus was now about to see what they were bringing with them. The prisoner. The man. Ursus was soon, he thought, to see Gwynplaine. That which they carried appeared. It was a bier. B-I-E-R. 4 men carried a bier, covered with black cloth. Behind them came a man with a shovel on his shoulders. A third lighted torch, held by a man reading a book, probably the chaplain, closed the procession. The bier followed the ranks of the police, who had turned to the right. Just at that moment, the head of the procession stopped. Ursus heard the grating of a key. Opposite the prison, in the low wall which ran along the other side of the street, another opening was illuminated by a torch passing beneath it. This gate, over which a death's head was placed, was that of the cemetery. The wapentake passed through it, then the men, then the second torch. The procession decreased therein, like a reptile entering his retreat. The files of police penetrated into that other darkness which was beyond the gate, then the bier, then the man with the spade, then the chaplain with his torch and his book, and the gate closed. There was nothing left but a haze of light above the wall. A muttering was heard, then some dull sounds, doubtless the chaplain and the gravedigger, the one throwing on the coffin some verses of scripture, the other some clods of earth. The muttering ceased. The heavy sounds ceased. A movement was made. Torches shone. The wapentake reappeared, holding high his weapon under the reopened gate of the cemetery. Then the chaplain with his book, and the gravedigger with his spade. Cortege reappeared without the coffin. The files of men crossed over in the same order, with the same taciturnity, and in the opposite direction. The gate of the cemetery closed. That of the prison opened. Its sepulchral architecture stood out against the light. The obscurity of the passage became vaguely visible. The solid and deep night of the jail was revealed to sight. Then the whole vision disappeared in the depths of shadow. The knell ceased. All was locked in silence, a sinister incarnation of shadows. A vanished vision. Nothing more. A passage of specters which had disappeared. The logical arrangement of surmises builds up something which at least resembles evidence. To the arrest of Gwynplaine, to the secret mode of his capture, to the return of his garments by the police officer, to the death bell of the prison to which he had been conducted, was now added, or rather adjusted, portentous circumstance, a coffin carried to the grave. "He is dead," cried Ursus. He sank down upon a stone. "Dead. They have killed him. Gwynplaine, my child, my son." And he burst into passionate sobs. End of chapter 4. Okay, so chapter 4. After hearing from Master Nicholas that the circus man wants to buy everything and has shown proof that Gwynplaine is not returning, Ursus just can't stand it. So he immediately leaves and he runs back to the prison. But he knows that he's not going to be able to see anything. They don't just let people into the prison, just like they don't just let people leave the prison. And as he's waiting there, he hears like the bell. And he's like, oh, okay, well, it's obviously midnight. Like, what? So he hears the bell and then he's like, oh my God, it just won't stop talking. So he starts counting it. And once we get to 12, he's like, oh, okay, cool. It is midnight. But then it continues and it goes to 13 and then it goes to 14 and then it goes to 15. And he's just like, okay, what is happening? And he realizes that it's not the time, it's the muta. And he knows that something big has happened, something big and something terrible. And at that moment, the quorum is leaving the prison and they have a coffin and they're leaving and they're going to the cemetery and they lower the coffin into the hole and they have scripture and they bury the coffin or at least throw some dirt on it and then they leave and Ursus knows that Gwynplaine is not dead, which is interesting because, I mean, he's not. The person is not. However, that's exactly what Barkilphedro said was, Gwynplaine is now dead. You are Fermain Clan Charlie. And I just think that's so interesting that it's not necessarily the death of the person, but the death of, like, the phase of who Gwynplaine was. And so Ursus is now mourning his son, who he has been taking care of for the last 15 years. And obviously he cares about him, even though he's like, you thief, you scoundrel, like all of these things. And Ursus just sort of cracks open and just breaks. What is going to happen? We'll do one more chapter. Chapter 5. State policy deals with little matters as well as with great. Ursus, alas, had boasted that he had never wept. His reservoir of tears was full, such plenitude as is accumulated drop on drop, sorrow on sorrow. Through a long existence is not to be poured out in a moment. Ursus wept alone. The first tear is a letting out of waters. He wept for Gwynplaine, for Dea, for himself, Ursus, for the wolf. He wept like a child. He wept like an old man. He wept for everything at which he had ever laughed. He paid off arrears. Man is never non-suited when he pleads his right to tears. The corpse they had just buried was Hardquanon's, not but Ursus could not know that. The hours crept on. Day began to break. The pale clothing of the morning was spread out, dimly creased with shadow, over the bowling green. The dawn lighted up the front of the Tadcaster Inn. Master Nicholas had not gone to bed, because sometimes the same occurrence produces sleeplessness in many. Troubles radiate in every direction. Throw a stone in the water and count the splashes. Master Nicholas felt himself impeached. It is very disagreeable that such things should happen in one's house. Master Nicholas, uneasy and foreseeing misfortunes, meditated. He regretted having received such people into his house. Had he but known that they would end by getting him into mischief. But the question was how to get rid of them. He had given Ursus a lease. What a blessing if he could free himself from it. How should he set to work to drive them out? Suddenly, the door of the inn resounded with one of those tumultuous knocks which in England announces somebody. The gamut of knocking corresponds with the ladder of hierarchy. It was not quite the knock of a lord, but it was the knock of a justice. The trembling innkeeper half opened his window. There was, indeed, the magistrate. Master Nicholas perceived at the door a body of police, from the head of which two men detached themselves, one of whom was the justice of the quorum. Master Nicholas had seen the justice of the quorum that morning, and recognized him. He did not know the other, who was a fat gentleman, with a waxen-colored face, a fashionable wig, and a traveling cloak. Nicholas was much afraid of the first of these persons, the justice of the quorum. He had been of the court. He would have feared the other most, because it was Barkilphedro. One of the subordinates knocked at the door again violently. The innkeeper, with great drops of perspiration on his brow from anxiety, opened it. The justice of the quorum, in the tone of a man who is employed in matters of police and who is well acquainted with various shades of vagrancy, raised his voice and asked severely for Master Ursus. The host, cap in hand, replied, "Your honor, he lives here." "I know it," said the justice. "No doubt, your honor." "Tell him to come down." Your honor, he is not here." "Where is he?" "I do not know." "How is that?" "He has not come in." "Then he must have gone out very early." "No, he went out very late." "What vagabonds!" replied the justice. "Your honor," said Master Nicholas softly, "here he comes." Ursus, indeed, had just come in sight, round a turn of the wall. He was returning to the inn. He had passed nearly the whole night between the jail, where at midday he had seen Gwynplaine, and the cemetery, where at midnight he had heard the grave filled up. He was pallid with two pallors, that of sorrow and of twilight. Dawn, which is light in a chrysalis state, leaves even those forms which are in movement in the uncertainty of night. Ursus, wan and indistinct, walked slowly, like a man in a dream. In the wild distraction produced by agony of mind, he had left the inn with his head bare. He had not even found out that he had no hat on. His spare, grey locks fluttered in the wind. His open eyes appeared sightless. Often when awake we are asleep, and as often when asleep we are awake. Ursus looked like a lunatic. "Master Ursus," cried the innkeeper, "come, their honors desire to speak with you." Master Nicholas, in his endeavor to soften matters down, let slip, although he would gladly have omitted this plural, "their honors," respectful to the group, but mortifying, perhaps, to the chief, confounded therein, to some degree, with his subordinates. Ursus started like a man falling off a bed on which he was sound asleep. "What is the matter?" said he. He saw the police, and at the head of the police the justice, a fresh and rude shock. But a short time ago the wapentake, now the justice of the quorum. He seemed to have been cast from one to the other, as ships by some reefs of which we have read in old stories. The justice of the quorum made him a sign to enter the tavern. Ursus obeyed. Govicum, who had just got up and who was sweeping the room, stopped his work, got into a corner behind the tables, put down his broom, and held his breath. He plunged his fingers into his hair and scratched his head, a symptom which indicated attention to what was about to occur. The justice of the quorum sat down on a form before a table. Barkilphedro took a chair. Ursus and Master Nicholas remained standing. The police officers, left outside, grouped themselves in front of the closed door. The justice of the quorum fixed his eye, full of the law, upon Ursus. He said, "You have a wolf?" Ursus answered, "Not exactly." "You have a wolf," continued the justice, emphasizing wolf with a decided accent. Ursus answered, "You see," and he was silent. "A misdemeanor," replied the justice. Ursus hazarded an excuse. "He is my servant." The justice placed his hand flat on the table with his fingers spread out, which is a very fine gesture of authority. Merry Andrew, tomorrow, by this hour, you and your wolf must have left England. If not, the wolf will be seized, carried to the register office, and killed." Ursus thought more murder, but he breathed not a syllable, and was satisfied with trembling in every limb. "You hear?" said the justice. Ursus nodded The justice persisted. Killed. There was silence. Strangled or drowned. The justice of the quorum watched Ursus. And yourself in prison. Ursus murmured, Your worship. Be off before tomorrow morning. If not, such is the order. Your worship. What? Must we leave England, he and I? Yes. Today? Today. What is to be done? Master Nicholas was happy. The magistrate whom he had feared had come to his aid. The police had acted as auxiliary to him, Nicholas. They had delivered him from such people. The means he had sought were brought to him. Ursus, whom he wanted to get rid of, was being driven away by the police, a superior authority. Nothing to object to. He was delighted. He interrupted. Your Honor, that man. He pointed to Ursus with his finger. That man wants to know how he is to leave England today. Nothing can be easier. There are nights and day at anchor on the Thames, both on this and on the other side of London Bridge, vessels that sail to the continent. They go from England to Denmark, to Holland, to Spain, not to France on account of the war, but everywhere else. Tonight several ships will sail, but 1 o'clock in the morning, which is the hour of high tide, and amongst others, the Vogot of Rotterdam. The justice of the quorum made a movement of his shoulder towards Ursus. Be it so. Leave by the first ship, by the Vogot. Your worship, said Ursus. Well, your worship, if I had, as formerly, only my little box on wheels, it might be done. A boat would contain that, but what? But now I have got the green box, which is a great cavern drawn by 2 horses, and however wide the ship might be, we could not get it into her. What is that to me? Said the justice. The wolf will be killed. Ursus shuddered as if he were grasped by a hand of ice. Monsters, he thought. Murdering people is their way of settling matters. The innkeeper smiled and addressed Ursus. Master Ursus, you can sell the green box. Ursus looked at Nicholas. Master Ursus, you have the offer? From whom? An offer of the caravan, an offer for the 2 horses, an offer for the 2 gypsy women, an offer from whom? Repeated Ursus. From the proprietor of the neighboring circus. Ursus remembered. It is true. Master Nicholas turned to the justice of the quorum. Your Honor, the bargain can be completed today. The proprietor of the circus close by wishes to buy the caravan and the horses. The proprietor of the circus is right, said the justice, because he will soon require them. A caravan and horses will be useful to him. He, too, will depart today. The reverend gentlemen of the parish of Southwark have complained of the indecent riot in Tarrinzeau Field. The sheriff has taken his measures. Tonight there will not be a single juggler's booth in the place. There must be an end to all these scandals. The honorable gentleman who designs to be here present. The justice of the quorum interrupted his speech to salute Barkilphedro, who returned the bow. The honorable gentleman who deigns to be present has just arrived from Windsor. He brings orders. Her Majesty has said it must be swept away. Ursus, during his long meditation all night, had not failed to put himself some questions. After all, he had only seen a bier. Could he be sure that it contained Gwynplaine? Other people might have died besides Gwynplaine. A coffin does not announce the name of the corpse as it passes by. A funeral had followed the arrest of Gwynplaine. That proved nothing. Post hoc, non propter hoc, etc. Ursus had begun to doubt. Hope burns and glimmers over misery like naphthalsa over water. Its hovering flame ever floats over human sorrow. Ursus had come to this conclusion. It is probable that it was Gwynplaine whom they buried, but it is not certain. Who knows? Perhaps Gwynplaine is still alive. Ursus bowed to the justice. Honorable judge, I will go away. We will all go away. All will go away by the Vograt of Rotterdam today. I will sell the green box, the horses, the trumpets, and gypsies, but I have a comrade whom I cannot leave behind. Gwynplaine. Gwynplaine is dead, said a voice. Ursus felt a cold sensation, such as is produced by a reptile crawling over the skin. It was Barkilphedro who had just spoken. The last gleam was extinguished. No more doubt now. Gwynplaine was dead. A person in authority must know. This one looked ill-favored enough to do so. Ursus bowed to him. Master Nicholas was a good-hearted man enough, but a dreadful coward. Once terrified, he became a brute. The greatest cruelty is that inspired by fear. He growled out, "This simplifies matters," and he indulged, standing behind Ursus, in rubbing his hands, a peculiarity of the selfish, signifying, "I am well out of it," and suggestive of Pontius Pilate washing his hands. Ursus, overwhelmed, bent down his head. The sentence on Gwynplaine had been executed. Death. His sentence was pronounced. Exile. Nothing remained but to obey. He felt as in a dream. Someone touched his arm. It was the other person, who was with the justice of the quorum. Ursus shuddered. The voice which had said, "Gwynplaine is dead," whispered in his ear, "Here are 10 guineas sent you by one who wishes you well." And Barkilphedro placed a little purse on a table before Ursus. We must not forget the casket that Barkilphedro had taken with him. 10 guineas out of 2,000. It was all that Barkilphedro could make up his mind to part with. In all conscience, it was enough. If he had given more, he would have lost. He had taken the trouble of finding out a lord, and having sunk the shaft, it was but fair that the first proceeds of the mine should belong to him. Those who see meanness in the act are right, but they would be wrong to feel astonished. Barkilphedro loved money, especially money which was stolen. An envious man is an avaricious one. Barkilphedro was not without his faults. The commission of crimes does not preclude the possession of vices. Tigers have their lice. Besides, he belonged to the school of Bacon. Barkilphedro turned towards the justice of the quorum and said to him, "Sir, be so good as to conclude this matter. I am in haste. A carriage and horses belongs to Her Majesty await me. I must go full gallop to Windsor, for I must be there within 2 hours' time. I have intelligence to give, and orders to take." The justice of the quorum arose. He went to the door, which was only latched, opened it, and, looking silently towards the police, beckoned to them authoritatively. They entered with that silence which heralds severity of action. Master Nicholas, satisfied with the rapid denouement which cut short his difficulties, charmed to be out of the entangled skein, was afraid when he saw the muster of officers, that they were going to apprehend Ursus in his house. 2 arrests, one after the other, made in his house, first that of Gwynplaine, then that of Ursus, might be injurious to the inn. Customers dislike police raids. Here, then, was a time for a respectful appeal, suppliant and generous. Master Nicholas turned towards the justice of the quorum, a smiling face, in which confidence was tempered by respect. "Your Honor," I venture to observe to your honor that these honorable gentlemen, the police officers, might be dispensed with, now that the wolf is about to be carried away from London, and that this man, Ursus, makes no resistance, and since your honor's orders are being punctually carried out, your honor will consider that the respectable business of the police, so necessary to the good of the kingdom, does great harm to an establishment, and that my house is innocent. The Mary Andrews of the Green Box having been swept away, as Her Majesty says, there is no longer any crime here, as I do not suppose that the blind girl and the two women are criminals. Therefore, I implore your honor to deign to shorten your august visit, and to dismiss these worthy gentlemen who have just entered, because there is nothing for them to do in my house, and if your honor will permit me to prove the justice of my speech under the form of a humble question, I will prove the inutility of these revered gentlemen's presence by asking your honor, if the man Ursus obeys orders and departs, who there can be to arrest here. Yourself, said the justice. A man does not argue with a sword which runs him through and through. Master Nicholas subsided. He cared not on what, on a table, on a form, on anything that happened to be there, prostrate. The justice raised his voice so that if there were people outside they might hear. Master Nicholas Plumptree, keeper of this tavern, this is the last point to be settled. This mountebank and the wolf are vagabonds. They are driven away. But the person most in fault is yourself. It is in your house, with your consent, that the law has been violated, and you, a man licensed, invested with a public responsibility, have established the scandal here. Master Nicholas, your license is taken away. You must pay the penalty and go to prison. The policemen surrounded the innkeeper. The justice continued, pointing out Govicum. Arrest that boy as an accomplice. The hand of an officer fell upon the collar of Govicum, who looked at him inquisitively. The boy was not much alarmed, scarcely understanding the occurrence. Having already observed many things out of the way, he wondered if this were the end of the comedy. The justice of the quorum forced his hat down on his head, crossed his hands on his stomach, which is the height of majesty, and added, "It is decided, Master Nicholas. You are to be taken to prison and put into jail. You and the boy. And this house, the Tadcaster Inn, is to remain shut up, condemned, and closed, for the sake of example, upon which you will follow us." End of the chapter and end of book the 6th, which is a perfect time to stop. But, okay, so what has happened? So the quorum appears at the Tadcaster Inn, and they're talking to Master Nicholas, and they are looking for Ursus. And Nicholas is like, Ursus isn't here. He left very late at night, and he has not returned. And then as they're talking, Ursus appears, and the justice there is like, okay, you gotta leave. You have to leave because you have a wolf, and if you don't leave, we are gonna kill the wolf, and that's terrible, and I hate that. And so Ursus is like, well, that's impossible. I can't leave. I can't leave without Gwynplaine. And Barkilphedro is there, and Barkilphedro is like, Miss Scusi, Gwynplaine is dead. And Ursus is upset once again because he had convinced himself and trying to grasp onto hope. He's like, okay, I don't know who was in the coffin that they buried. Gwynplaine could be alive. People die all the time. It didn't necessarily need to be Gwynplaine who was in the coffin, which it really isn't. Barkilphedro is just being Barkilphedro. And so Nicholas, who is very excited to finally have Ursus and his whole crew out of his inn, is like, I know a ship that leaves bright and early. He can be on that ship. and I know how he can get money for it. The circus over there said that they would pay for it, and the justice is like, cool, the circus is also leaving because there was a ruckus here and we're getting rid of all fun. No juggler to be had. And so Ursus is like, all right, I guess I'm leaving. And Master Nicholas is just so happy. And he's like thanking the judges or the who are they? The police, and just being so excited that he's leaving, blah blah blah, and so thankful, blah blah blah. And then the justice is like, okay, but like we also came for you. Like you're arrested because you knew what was happening and you're a licensed innkeeper and you let all of this happen, so you need to forfeit your license, you need to pay a fine, and you need to go to jail. And also that boy, who is a child, who is not the owner of the inn and just works there, arrests the boy too because he is also at fault. Oh, and also Barkilphedro gave Ursus 10 guinea of the over 1,000 guineas that he was supposed to be giving him. So that's fine. That's fine. Because of course he does. Because of course he does. Because he's Barkilphedro. Shakes fist. And that's where we left off. And that's where we're going to stop tonight. We will continue right where we left off with book the 6th, which is exciting. I am still really enjoying this. I have no idea how this is going to end. I have not read this book before. I have not seen any interpretations or adaptations. So I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm excited. I'm ready. So yeah, that's going to be it for tonight. I hope you all have a great rest of your night. We'll continue very, very soon. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1,000% appreciate you, and I 1,000% appreciate your support. If I do not see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Goodbye.